The sound of shattering glass pierced the quiet evening as Katherine Winters clutched her medical bag to her chest, backing away from the storefront window that had just exploded beside her. A rock lay among the glass shards, wrapped in a piece of paper with a crude drawing of a witch being burned at the stake. It was 1878 in the small town of Bitter Creek, Wyoming territory, and fear had turned to hatred faster than she could have imagined. There she is. A voice shouted from down the street. The witch who killed Thomas Miller. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she saw the mob forming at least 20 men with lanterns and torches, their faces twisted with rage in the flickering light. She had only been trying to help. Thomas Miller had been beyond saving when they'd brought him to her, his body ravaged by fever and infection from a mining accident 3 days prior. No doctor could have saved him, but as the only woman practicing medicine in the territory, she made an easy target for their grief. "I did everything I could," she called out, but her words were drowned by angry shouts. "Burn the witch, run her out, string her up." Katherine turned and fled down the dusty main street, her long skirts hampering her movement as she raced toward the edge of town. Behind her, the mob grew, their angry voices swelling into a roar of righteous fury. The medical bag bounced against her side. Everything she owned in the world was either in that bag or in the small room above the apothecary shop that she'd never see again. The thunder of hooves made her glance over her shoulder, expecting to see mounted pursuers. Instead, a lone rider on a magnificent black stallion galloped toward her from the direction she was heading. The man wore a dark hat pulled low, but she could see the glint of his eyes assessing the situation in an instant. Without slowing, he guided his horse between Katherine and the approaching mob, the animal rearing dramatically as he pulled to a stop. In one fluid motion, the stranger drew his revolver and fired a shot into the air that echoed through the darkening streets of Bitter Creek. "That's far enough," he called out, his voice carrying the easy authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. The mob faltered, some men stopping outright while others continued their advance more cautiously. "This ain't your business, mister," shouted Harlan Davis, the blacksmith whose shop sat next to the saloon. "That woman's a witch. She killed Thomas Miller with her heathen remedies." The stranger dismounted in one smooth motion, keeping himself between Katherine and the crowd. She could see him clearly now, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair visible beneath his hat, and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. He couldn't have been more than 30, but there was something in his stance that spoke of experience beyond his years. "I don't see a witch," he said calmly. "I see a mob about to do something they'll regret come morning." He kept his revolver lowered but ready. 20 against one woman doesn't seem like fair odds to me. She ain't natural," someone called from the back of the crowd. "Using them books and potions instead of proper prayers." Katherine stepped forward. "I'm a doctor. I studied at the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. Thomas Miller had blood poisoning that had spread too far before I ever saw him." The stranger glanced at her, a flash of surprise in his eyes before he returned his attention to the mob. "Back away now," he said, his voice hardening. "I won't ask twice." Harlan Davis spat in the dirt. "Who the hell are you to tell us what to do in our own town?" The stranger's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Name's Preston Cole. Some folks call me the Shadow Rider." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even Katherine had heard whispers of the Shadow Rider, a former Union scout turned bounty hunter who was said to move like a ghost and shoot like lightning. The stories differed depending on who told them, but all agreed on one thing: crossing him was a mistake few lived to regret. "Now," Preston continued, "I suggest you all go home and sleep off whatever's got you thinking it's acceptable to chase a lady through the streets." The mood of the crowd shifted, uncertainty replacing the bloodlust of moments before. Several men at the edges began to back away. "She still ain't welcome here," Harlan insisted, though with noticeably less conviction. Preston nodded as if considering this reasonable. "Fair enough. The lady and I will be leaving Bitter Creek tonight." He turned to Katherine, his expression softening slightly. "If that suits you, madam." Catherine glanced back at the town that had been her home for nearly a year, at the people who had come to her for help with everything from birthing babies to setting broken bones, now transformed into a vengeful mob by fear and superstition. There was nothing left for her here. "Yes," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I believe it does." With practiced ease, Preston helped her mount his horse before swinging up behind her. The mob parted silently as he guided the stallion through their midst, his body a solid presence at Catherine's back. No one raised a hand to stop them as they rode out of Bitter Creek, the torchlight fading behind them as darkness settled over the prairie. Catherine held tightly to her medical bag with one hand and the saddle horn with the other, acutely aware of the stranger's arms on either side of her as he held the reins. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "Thank you," she said when they were well beyond the town limits, her voice nearly lost in the rhythm of the horse's hooves. "Don't thank me yet, madam," Preston replied, his breath warm against her ear. "We've got a long ride ahead, and I expect you'll be wanting some explanations." "As will I be providing some, I imagine," Catherine said. She felt rather than saw his slight smile. "I reckon we'll have time for both." As the silhouette of Bitter Creek disappeared behind them, Catherine released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Whatever lay ahead couldn't possibly be worse than what she'd left behind. At least, that's what she told herself as they rode into the vast darkness of the Wyoming night, a woman with nowhere to go and a man whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. The moon rose high as they continued riding, casting the rolling landscape in silver light. Catherine's back ached from maintaining her rigid posture, trying to keep a proper distance between herself and the stranger despite their shared saddle. "We'll stop soon," Preston said, breaking a silence that had stretched for miles. "There's a creek about half an hour ahead where we can rest the horse." Catherine nodded, then realized he might not see the gesture. That would be appreciated. "You're not what I expected," he said after another moment. "And what did you expect, Mr. Cole? Just Cole is fine, or Preston if you prefer." He guided the horse around a rocky outcropping. "And I'm not rightly sure what I expected when I rode into Bitter Creek, but it wasn't rescuing a lady doctor from a lynch mob." "I'm not sure lady doctor is how they would have described me," Catherine said with a bitterness she couldn't quite hide. "What happened back there?" His voice held no judgment, only curiosity. Catherine sighed. "Thomas Miller was brought to me 3 days ago after a cave-in at the silver mine. His leg was crushed and infection had already set in. I did everything I could clean the wound, administered laudanum for the pain, even tried to drain the infection, but the blood poisoning had spread too far." She paused. "He died this morning. By afternoon, his family was saying I'd killed him with my unnatural methods by evening." "Well, you saw how quickly fear spreads. People fear what they don't understand," Preston said, "and most folks don't understand much beyond their own backyard. You don't seem afraid of a woman practicing medicine." She felt him shrug. "I've seen army surgeons hack off limbs with rusty saws and whiskey for antiseptic. I've seen Cheyenne medicine women save men the army doctors had given up for dead. Way I figure it, healing's healing, no matter who's doing it." The simple practicality of his perspective was refreshing after months of sideways glances and whispered comments in Bitter Creek. Even those who had sought her help had often done so with reluctance, as if her knowledge was both valuable and somehow shameful. "And what brings the infamous shadow rider to a backwater like Bitter Creek?" she asked, partly to shift the conversation away from herself and partly out of genuine curiosity. Preston was quiet for so long that Catherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured. "I was tracking someone, a man named James Harker. He robbed a bank in Cheyenne, killed 2 people in the process." His arms tightened briefly around her as the horse navigated a steep dip in the terrain. Trail led to Bitter Creek, but it went cold there. "I was about to move on when I heard the commotion." "So you interrupted your manhunt to rescue me," Catherine said. "That seems unexpected for someone in your profession. Maybe I don't like seeing a mob take justice into their own hands. Tends to lead to innocent people getting hurt." Something in his tone suggested personal experience, but Katherine knew better than to pry. They rode in silence until the promised creek appeared, a silver ribbon in the moonlight cutting through a small grove of cottonwoods. Preston dismounted first, then offered his hand to help Katherine down. Her legs trembled as they took her weight after hours in the saddle. He steadied her with a hand at her elbow, releasing her as soon as she found her balance. "Rest here," he said, gesturing to a fallen log. "I'll see to the horse." Katherine sank gratefully onto the log, setting her medical bag beside her. She watched as Preston removed the saddle from his stallion and led the animal to drink from the creek. There was an easy confidence in his movements, a man completely at home in the wilderness. While he tended to the horse, Katherine took stock of her situation. She had the clothes on her back, her medical supplies, and precisely $3.47 in her pocket. Her entire life had been uprooted in a single evening, and she was now miles from civilization in the company of a man whose reputation painted him as both hero and villain depending on who told the tale. And yet, strangely, she felt safer than she had in weeks. Preston returned with a canteen and offered it to her. "It's not fancy, but it's wet. Thank you." Katherine drank deeply, only now realizing how thirsty she was. The water was cool and fresh. He settled on the far end of the log, giving her space. "We should reach Sheffield by midday tomorrow. It's a decent-sized town with a stagecoach stop. You can take a coach to Cheyenne or Denver from there." The practicality of his plan made perfect sense, yet Katherine felt a strange reluctance at the thought of parting ways so soon. "Is that where you're headed as well?" Preston shook his head. "I need to pick up Harker's trail. Thought I might swing north toward the Montana territory. Word is he has connections there." "I see." Katherine handed back the canteen. Their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange, and she was surprised by the warmth of his hand in the cool night air. "What about you?" he asked. "Where will you go from Sheffield?" It was the question Katherine had been avoiding asking herself. "I'm not sure, perhaps Denver. There might be opportunities for a female physician in a larger city." "You could go back east," Preston suggested. "Back to Philadelphia where you studied." Katherine shook her head. "There's nothing for me there anymore. My parents died of influenza 3 years ago. My brother disappeared during the war." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I came west because I thought people here would be more accepting of unconventional choices, that they might judge me by my skills rather than my gender." "Some will," Preston said. "Some won't, same as anywhere, I expect. Perhaps, but I've found that out here at least people eventually need a doctor badly enough to overlook their prejudices." She smiled wryly. "Until something goes wrong, of course." Preston studied her for a long moment. "You're not what most folks would expect of a doctor." "Because I'm a woman, because you're young," he corrected, "and because despite what happened back there, you don't seem bitter." Katherine considered this. "I suppose I've always believed that ignorance can be cured with knowledge, fear with understanding. It's not so different from treating an illness." "That's a generous way of looking at a mob that was ready to hang you. Is it so different from how you see things, Mr. Cole?" "You could have shot those men tonight. From what I've heard of the Shadow Rider, you certainly have the skill, but you chose to defuse the situation instead." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Maybe I just didn't want to waste the bullets." Katherine laughed softly, surprising herself. "I doubt that very much." Something shifted in Preston's expression, a momentary softening that disappeared so quickly Katherine wondered if she had imagined it. He stood abruptly. "You should get some rest, Doc. I'll take first watch." "First watch? Do you expect trouble?" Preston gazed into the darkness beyond their small camp. "I always expect trouble. That's how I've stayed alive this long." Katherine wanted to ask more about the troubles he'd faced, about the man he was tracking, about the life that had led him to become the Shadow Rider. But she recognized the closure in his tone and respected it. There would be time for questions tomorrow on the ride to Sheffield. "Wake me when it's my turn to watch, then," she said instead. Preston looked as if he might argue, but then nodded. "I'll wake you in a few hours." Katherine made herself as comfortable as possible, using her medical bag as a pillow and arranging her skirts to provide some protection from the cool night air. As she closed her eyes, She was acutely aware of Preston's presence, the soft sound of his breathing, the occasional shift of his weight, the sense of security his vigilance provided. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that for a man with such a dangerous reputation, Preston Cole had remarkably gentle eyes. Katherine woke to the gentle pressure of a hand on her shoulder. The sky had lightened to the deep blue that precedes dawn, and the air held the sharp chill of early morning. "We should get moving," Preston said, already fully alert. "I let you sleep through the night." She sat up, stiff from sleeping on the hard ground. "You were supposed to wake me for my watch. You needed the rest more than I needed sleep." He offered her the canteen again. "Besides, I'm used to keeping my eyes open." As Katherine drank, she studied him in the growing light. There were shadows beneath his eyes that hadn't been there the night before, but otherwise he showed no signs of fatigue. His movements were just as precise, his gaze just as sharp. "Thank you," she said, returning the canteen. "Not just for letting me sleep, but for everything. I realize I never properly expressed my gratitude last night." Preston seemed uncomfortable with her thanks. "No need for that. Anyone would have done the same." "We both know that's not true." Katherine stood, brushing dirt from her skirts. "In fact, quite a few people were prepared to do the opposite." "Well, those people were fools," he said simply, as if stating an obvious fact. They broke camp quickly, Preston efficiently saddling the horse while Katherine repacked her medical bag. Within minutes, they were back on the trail, riding east toward Sheffield. The sunrise painted the prairie in gold and amber, revealing a landscape that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. "It's beautiful," Katherine said, taking in the vista. "That it is," Preston agreed. "Easy to forget when you're just passing through, following tracks or running from something." "Is that what you do, just pass through?" She felt him shift slightly behind her. "Been my way for a long time now, hard to put down roots in my line of work. The bounty hunting, that and before. I scouted for the Union during the war, then did some work for the cavalry afterward. Tracking's what I know, and there's always someone finding criminals mostly, but sometimes lost children or travelers who wandered off the trail." "It sounds lonely," Katherine said before she could stop herself. Preston was quiet for a moment. "Never really thought about it that way, just seemed like the natural way of things after the war. Nothing felt quite right about staying in one place." There was a story there, Katherine sensed, but Preston didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. They rode in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the air around them. Around mid-morning, they stopped briefly to rest the horse and stretch their legs. Katherine was examining a cluster of wildflowers, considering their potential medicinal properties, when Preston suddenly tensed beside her. "Get back on the horse," he said quietly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. Katherine followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual in the rolling prairie around them. "What is it, riders, coming fast from the south?" His expression was grim. "Could be nothing, but I don't like coincidences." Heart pounding, Katherine gathered her skirts and hurried back to the horse. Preston helped her mount quickly before swinging up behind her. They had just started moving again when 5 riders appeared on the ridge to their south, silhouetted against the sky. "Friends of yours?" Katherine asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Don't recognize them from here," Preston replied, urging his horse to a faster pace. "But I don't plan on waiting for introductions." The riders on the ridge had spotted them now and were changing course to intercept. Preston guided their mount off the trail, cutting across the open prairie toward a line of trees that marked another creek bed in the distance. "Hold tight," he warned as they picked up speed. Katherine gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles as they galloped across the uneven terrain. The pursuing riders were gaining ground, close enough now that she could hear their shouts carrying on the wind. "It's Cole," one of them called, "and he's got the woman," Preston cursed under his breath. "Looks like your friends from Bitter Creek didn't give up so easily. How did they find us?" Katherine asked, fear tightening her throat. "Someone must have recognized me and guessed which way we'd head." He urged the horse to greater speed. "We need to reach those trees, we'll have better cover there." But the pursuers were closing the gap rapidly. Their horses were fresh, while Preston's stallion had been carrying double weight since the previous evening. A shot rang out, the bullet whistling past them to kick up dirt several yards ahead. "That's just a warning," Preston said. "They want us to stop." "What do we do?" Preston's arm tightened around her waist. "We're not stopping." They reached the tree line with the pursuers less than 100 yards behind. Preston guided them into the cover of the cottonwoods, following the winding creek bed. The terrain here was rougher, with fallen logs and dense underbrush slowing their progress. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Katherine flinched involuntarily. "I need you to do exactly as I say," Preston said, his voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. "When I stop, you'll take the reins and keep going along the creek. Don't stop, don't look back. Just keep riding east until you reach Sheffield." "What about you? I'll buy you some time." The implication was clear, and Katherine's stomach dropped. "No, I won't leave you to face them alone." "This isn't a debate, Doc." His tone brooked no argument. "Those men want you dead, and I didn't ride into a hornet's nest just to let them catch up to you a day later." Before Katherine could protest further, Preston pulled the horse to a stop in a small clearing. He dismounted quickly, keeping one hand on the reins. "Stay in the trees," he instructed, passing the reins to her. "The town's about 5 miles east. You can't miss it." "Preston, go," he said firmly, giving the horse a slap on the flank that sent it moving forward. Katherine looked back to see him drawing both his revolver and a second gun from a holster at his ankle. He took position behind a large tree, his expression set in lines of grim determination. The sounds of the pursuing riders grew louder as they entered the tree line. With a last reluctant glance, Katherine turned forward and urged the horse deeper into the cover of the trees, following the creek as Preston had instructed. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest, torn between the instinct for self-preservation and the knowledge that she was leaving a man to face danger alone on her behalf. The sounds of gunfire erupted behind her multiple shots in rapid succession, followed by shouts. Katherine flinched but kept riding, forcing herself not to look back. The creek curved northward, and as she followed it, the sounds of the confrontation grew fainter. She had gone perhaps half a mile when her conscience finally overcame her fear. Preston had risked his life to save her from the mob in Bitter Creek. She couldn't abandon him now, regardless of his instructions. Katherine pulled the horse to a stop and dismounted, tying the reins securely to a low-hanging branch. She opened her medical bag and removed several items she thought might be useful: bandages, a small bottle of laudanum, a packet of sulfa powder for wounds. These she tucked into the pockets of her skirt before cautiously making her way back toward the clearing where she had left Preston. The gunfire had stopped by the time she drew near, replaced by the sound of men's voices. Katherine moved carefully from tree to tree, staying hidden as she approached. When she was close enough to see the clearing, she pressed herself against the trunk of a large cottonwood and peered around it. The scene that greeted her made her blood run cold. 4 men stood in a loose circle, their guns trained on Preston, who knelt in the center with his hands raised. A 5th man lay motionless on the ground nearby. Blood stained Preston's left sleeve, but he seemed otherwise unharmed. Katherine recognized Harlan Davis, the blacksmith, among the men surrounding Preston. Another was the owner of the saloon in Bitter Creek. The other 2 were strangers to her, probably hired guns or friends Davis had convinced to join the pursuit. "Should have minded your own business, Cole," Davis was saying. "This don't concern you." "Seems like it does now," Preston replied, his voice steady despite his vulnerable position. The saloon owner spat on the ground. "Where's the witch?" "Long gone," Preston said. "Probably halfway to Sheffield by now." Davis raised his gun, pointing it directly at Preston's head. "Then I guess we got no further use for you." Katherine's mind raced. She had no weapon, no way to intervene directly without getting herself and possibly Preston killed. But she did have her medical knowledge and an idea. Moving as quietly as possible, she circled behind the men, positioning herself near the body of the fallen pursuer. When she was in place, she took a deep breath and stepped into view. "He's still alive." She called out, kneeling beside the motionless man. but he needs immediate attention. The four men whirled toward her, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Preston needed. In one fluid motion, he swept the legs out from under Davis, simultaneously drawing a small knife from his boot and hurling it with deadly accuracy at the saloon owner. The knife embedded itself in the man's shoulder, causing him to drop his gun with a howl of pain. Preston rolled to the side as the remaining two men recovered from their surprise and opened fire. Katherine dove for cover behind a fallen log as bullets splintered the wood around her. She heard Preston returning fire, the distinctive report of his revolver cutting through the chaos. When the shooting stopped again, Katherine risked a glance over the log. Preston stood with his gun trained on Davis, who was now the only one of the pursuers still on his feet. The saloon owner clutched his wounded shoulder, while the other two men lay motionless on the ground. "Drop it," Preston ordered Davis, who still held his revolver. The blacksmith's face contorted with rage, but after a moment's hesitation, he lowered his gun to the ground. "Now kick it away," Preston said. Davis complied, sending the weapon skidding across the clearing. "You're making a mistake, Cole," he snarled. "That woman's a witch. She killed Thomas Miller with her unnatural ways. Seems to me the only unnatural thing here is a grown man chasing down a woman because he's afraid of what he doesn't understand," Preston replied coldly. He glanced toward Katherine. "You all right, Doc?" she nodded, rising shakily from behind the log. "Yes, I'm fine." "Good." Preston returned his attention to Davis. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your friend there," he nodded toward the saloon owner, "and ride back to Bitter Creek. You're going to tell everyone that Dr. Winters is under my protection, and if anyone comes looking for her again, they'll answer to me. Do I make myself clear?" Davis glared but nodded grudgingly. "What about them?" Katherine asked, gesturing to the men on the ground. Preston's expression remained impassive. "The one by the tree took a bullet to the leg. He'll live if the wound doesn't fester. The other one." He shook his head slightly. Katherine moved to examine the injured man, her doctor's instincts taking over despite everything that had happened. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his thigh, missing the major artery. She quickly cleaned and bandaged the wound, administering a small dose of laudanum for the pain. "He'll need proper medical attention," she told Davis, "but he should be able to ride if you take it slow." Davis looked at her with a mixture of fear and confusion, clearly struggling to reconcile her care for his companion with his belief that she was somehow evil. "Why would you help him?" he asked. "Because I'm a doctor," Katherine replied simply. "That's what I do." While Davis helped his injured companions onto their horses, Preston kept his gun ready, his eyes never leaving the men. When they were mounted and ready to depart, he delivered a final warning. "Remember what I said. Anyone comes after Dr. Winters again, they won't live to regret it." The three men rode away, supporting their injured companion between them. Katherine watched them go, a strange mixture of relief and apprehension washing over her. When they were out of sight, she turned to Preston. "You're injured," she said, noticing again the bloodstain on his sleeve. "It's just a graze," he dismissed, but winced when she touched his arm. "Let me be the judge of that." Katherine guided him to sit on a fallen log and carefully rolled up his sleeve to examine the wound. As he'd said, it was relatively minor. A bullet had grazed his upper arm, leaving a furrow about 3 inches long but not particularly deep. "You're lucky," she said, cleaning the wound with water from his canteen and a clean cloth from her medical bag. "Another inch and it would have hit bone." Preston watched her work, his expression unreadable. "That was a foolish thing you did coming back," says the man who was kneeling at gunpoint when I arrived, Katherine countered, applying sulfa powder to the wound. "I had the situation under control." Katherine raised an eyebrow. "Clearly." To her surprise, a small smile tugged at the corner of Preston's mouth. "Maybe not entirely under control," he conceded. "In any case," Katherine said, wrapping a bandage around his arm, "I couldn't just leave you to face them alone, not after what you did for me in Bitter Creek. I thought I told you to keep riding to Sheffield. You did. I chose not to follow that particular instruction." Preston studied her face. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Dr. Winters." "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted, tying off the bandage. "And please call me Katherine." I think we're well past formalities at this point, Catherine, he repeated, as if testing the name. It suits you. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits despite their different paths. Then Preston cleared his throat and stood, breaking the moment. We should move on, he said, retrieving his weapons and checking them methodically. Davis and his friends may think twice before coming after you again, but I'd rather not take chances. Catherine packed away her medical supplies. Will we still reach Sheffield by midday? Preston glanced at the sun, now high overhead. Probably closer to late afternoon now, but we'll make it before dark. They returned to where Catherine had left the horse, finding the animal grazing contentedly along the creek bank. Preston helped her mount before swinging up behind her, his injured arm apparently causing him little discomfort. As they rode out of the trees and back onto the open prairie, Catherine felt a curious sense of security despite the danger they had just faced. Whatever lay ahead in Sheffield or beyond seemed less daunting with Preston at her back. Thank you, she said after they had ridden in silence for some time, for standing between me and harm, again. Preston's response was so quiet she almost didn't hear it. Always, Catherine, always. The remainder of their journey to Sheffield passed without incident. The town appeared on the horizon in the late afternoon, just as Preston had predicted, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the stage road, larger than Bitter Creek but still modest by Eastern standards. As they rode down the main street, Catherine observed the usual establishments of a frontier town. A general store, a saloon, a small hotel, a livery stable, and various other businesses. People moved about their affairs, some pausing to watch the strangers ride by with curious eyes. Preston guided the horse to the hotel, a 2-story wooden structure with a sign proclaiming it the Sheffield House. He dismounted first, then helped Catherine down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he stepped back. Wait here, he said. I'll see about rooms. Catherine nodded, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after nearly 24 hours on the trail. Her dark blue traveling dress was dusty and wrinkled, her hair coming loose from its pins. She attempted to smooth her skirts and tuck stray strands of hair back into place while Preston disappeared into the hotel. He returned a few minutes later. Got you a room. Hotel's not fancy, but it's clean. There's a bathhouse out back if you want to wash up. That sounds heavenly, Catherine admitted. What about you? I'll get us something to eat while you freshen up. Meet me in the dining room when you're ready. The hotel room was indeed simple but clean, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a pitcher and basin, a small dresser, and a chair by the window. Catherine set her medical bag on the bed and took a moment to simply breathe, the events of the past day catching up to her now that she was finally alone and safe. The bathhouse proved to be a welcome luxury after days on the trail. Catherine soaked in the hot water, washing away the dust and fear of Bitter Creek and the subsequent chase. By the time she had dressed in her now clean but still wrinkled dress and arranged her hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck, she felt almost human again. She found Preston waiting in the small dining room attached to the hotel. He had also taken the opportunity to clean up, his dark hair still damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. He wore a clean shirt, and Catherine wondered briefly where he had acquired it before remembering that experienced travelers like him likely kept spare clothing in their saddlebags. He stood when she entered, a gesture of courtesy that seemed at odds with his reputation as a dangerous bounty hunter. You look rested, he said, the slight hesitation suggesting he had considered and discarded several other comments. Thank you. Catherine sat in the chair he pulled out for her. I feel considerably better after the bath. A middle-aged woman in an apron approached their table. Evening, folks. We've got stew and fresh bread tonight and pie for dessert if you're interested. That sounds perfect, Catherine said with a smile. Thank you. When the woman had gone to fetch their meal, Preston leaned forward slightly. I've been asking around town. The eastbound stage comes through tomorrow afternoon. It can take you to Cheyenne, and from there you can connect to Denver if that's still your plan. Katherine felt a strange disappointment at the reminder that their paths would soon diverge. Yes, I suppose that makes the most sense. I spoke with the telegraph operator as well, wired ahead to make sure there's no trouble waiting for you. Preston's expression darkened. Sometimes men like Davis don't give up easily. You think they might try to intercept me in Cheyenne? The thought sent a chill through Katherine despite the warm dining room. Preston shook his head. Not likely, but I don't take chances with people's safety. Their food arrived: hearty beef stew, crusty bread, and strong coffee. Katherine realized she was famished and ate with enthusiasm, momentarily setting aside her concerns about the future. "Tell me about your plans," Preston said after they had eaten in silence for a few minutes. "What will you do in Denver?" Katherine considered the question. "Find work if I can. There are hospitals there that might be more accepting of a female physician than a small town like Bitter Creek. If not, I could establish a private practice." "Do you have funds to set yourself up?" The question was practical rather than intrusive. "Some," Katherine admitted. "Not much. Enough for a few weeks of lodging while I look for opportunities, perhaps." Preston nodded thoughtfully. "Denver's growing fast, lots of folks needing medical care. You'll find your place." "I hope so." Katherine took a sip of her coffee. "What about you? Will you continue north after James Harker?" "That's the plan." Preston broke off a piece of bread. "Man like that can't be allowed to roam free." "Is that why you do it? Hunt men like him?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. "During the war, I saw what happens when violence goes unchecked. When I was scouting for the cavalry, I saw it again, not just from outlaws, but sometimes from those meant to uphold the law." His gaze returned to her face. "Someone has to stand in between. Someone has to say enough." Katherine was struck by the conviction in his voice, the sense of purpose that seemed to drive him. "It's dangerous work." "So is being a doctor on the frontier," he countered with a slight smile. "We all have our callings, Katherine." The way he said her name sent an unexpected warmth through her. "I suppose we do." They finished their meal as dusk settled outside the windows. When they had eaten their fill, including generous slices of apple pie, Preston paid the bill despite Katherine's protests. "Consider it an apology for the hard riding and sleeping on the ground," he said. They walked together to the staircase that led to the hotel rooms. At the bottom of the stairs, Preston stopped. "I've taken a room at the Livery," he explained when Katherine looked at him questioningly. "Need to keep an eye on my horse after pushing him so hard today." "Oh." Katherine tried to hide her disappointment. "Of course." Preston hesitated, seeming to struggle with something he wanted to say. "I'll come by in the morning. Make sure you get on that stage safely." "Thank you." Katherine knew she should turn and go upstairs, but something kept her rooted to the spot, unwilling to end their time together. Preston took a step back, breaking the moment. "Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Preston." She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the lamplight of the hotel lobby before he disappeared through the front door. Only then did Katherine climb the stairs to her room, a curious heaviness in her chest that she wasn't entirely ready to examine. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and opened her medical bag, taking inventory of her supplies and possessions. It wasn't much to show for 30 years of life: some instruments, medicines, a few personal items, and the clothes on her back. Tomorrow she would board a stagecoach bound for Cheyenne, then Denver, to start yet another new chapter. Alone, Katherine moved to the window and looked out at the quiet main street of Sheffield. Somewhere out there, Preston Cole was settling in for the night, perhaps cleaning his guns or planning his route north. By this time tomorrow, he would be gone from her life, continuing his solitary pursuit of justice while she sought her own path. The thought brought an unexpected ache. In the brief time they had spent together, Katherine had glimpsed something in Preston that resonated with her own spirit: a determination to do what was right despite the cost, a willingness to stand apart from the crowd when necessary. She had never met anyone quite like him. With a sigh, Katherine turned from the window and prepared for bed. Whatever feelings might be stirring within her were irrelevant. Their paths had crossed briefly, and tomorrow they would diverge again. That was the nature of life on the frontier. Still, as she drifted towards sleep, Katherine found herself hoping that morning might be slow to come. The knock on her door came shortly after dawn, startling Katherine from a restless sleep filled with dreams of angry mobs and galloping horses. She rose quickly, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders before opening the door. Preston stood in the hallway, already fully dressed and alert despite the early hour. "Sorry to wake you," he said. "There's been a change of plans." Katherine's heart quickened with alarm. "What's happened?" "Is it Davis?" "No, nothing like that." Preston glanced down the empty hallway. "May I come in?" Just for a moment, Katherine hesitated, acutely aware of the impropriety of allowing a man into her hotel room, but the urgency in Preston's manner overrode her concerns about propriety. She stepped aside to let him enter, leaving the door ajar for the sake of appearances. Preston remained standing just inside the doorway, maintaining a respectful distance. "I received a telegram this morning. Harker was spotted in a settlement called Red Rock, about 40 miles northwest of here. If I leave now, I might catch him before he moves on." "I see." Katherine tried to hide her disappointment. "So you won't be here when the stage arrives." "That's what I wanted to discuss with you." Preston seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Red Rock is on the way to Cheyenne, just by a different route. If you were willing to delay your journey to Denver by a day or two, we could travel together." Katherine stared at him, surprised by the offer. "You want me to accompany you while you track an outlaw?" "Not exactly." Preston ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that suggested rare nervousness. "Red Rock has no doctor. The nearest medical help is in Cheyenne, a full day's ride away. The telegram mentioned that several people were injured during Harker's robbery, including a child." Understanding dawned on Katherine. "You think I could help them?" Preston nodded. "I know it's asking a lot. The trail will be rough, and there's the risk that Harker might still be in the area, but those people need help that I can't provide." Katherine considered the proposal. Her original plan had been to reach Denver as quickly as possible to begin establishing herself. But the thought of injured people, especially a child with no medical care, tugged at her conscience. And if she were honest with herself, the prospect of a few more days in Preston's company held its own appeal. "When would we leave?" she asked. "As soon as you're ready. It's a full day's ride to Red Rock, and I'd like to get there before nightfall if possible." Katherine made her decision. "Give me 15 minutes to dress and pack my things." Relief washed over Preston's face. "Thank you, Katherine. I'll arrange for supplies and meet you downstairs." True to her word, Katherine was ready in 15 minutes, her medical bag packed and her traveling dress buttoned. She found Preston waiting in the hotel lobby, speaking with the proprietor. When he saw her, he excused himself and came to meet her. "Everything's arranged," he said. "I've settled both our bills and purchased some provisions for the journey." "You didn't need to pay for my room," Katherine protested. Preston shrugged. "Consider it payment in advance for your medical services in Red Rock." Outside, Preston's black stallion was saddled and waiting, along with a second horse, a sturdy bay mare. "I thought you might prefer your own mount for this journey," Preston explained, helping Katherine secure her medical bag to the saddle. The livery owner was willing to sell her for a reasonable price. Katherine ran a hand along the mare's neck, touched by Preston's thoughtfulness. "She's beautiful, but I can't accept such an expensive gift." "It's not a gift," Preston said. "It's a necessity. The trail to Red Rock is too rough to double ride the way we did from Bitter Creek, and you'll need a reliable horse of your own if you're going to establish a practice in Denver." His practicality made it difficult to argue. "Thank you," Katherine said instead. "I'll repay you when I can." Preston helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse. "Ready?" Katherine nodded, adjusting to the feel of the mare beneath her. "Lead the way." They rode out of Sheffield as the town was coming to life, shopkeepers opening their doors and workers heading to their jobs. A few people watched them pass, but there was none of the hostility Katherine had experienced in Bitter Creek. Here they were simply travelers passing through a common enough sight in a town on the stage route. Once beyond the town limits, Preston set a steady pace northwestward, away from the main trail to Cheyenne. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they rode. the rolling prairie giving way to rocky outcroppings and steeper hills. Despite the challenging landscape, Katherine found herself enjoying the journey. The bay mare was sure-footed and responsive, and the vast Wyoming sky stretched endlessly above them, painted in shades of blue that seemed impossible in their intensity. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat some of the provisions. Preston had purchased jerky, hard biscuits, and dried apples, washed down with water from their canteens. "How did you become a doctor?" Preston asked as they sat in the shade of a lone cottonwood tree. "It can't have been an easy path for a woman." Katherine smiled at the memory. "My father was a physician in Philadelphia. When my brother and I were children, he would let us observe him treating patients in his home office. Michael, my brother, had no interest in medicine, but I was fascinated. I would sneak his medical texts from his bookshelf and read them by candlelight after everyone was asleep. And your father encouraged this?" "Not at first. He thought it was just a girlish fancy that would pass." Katherine broke off a piece of jerky. "But when I was 16, there was an accident at the factory near our home. Many people were injured and my father needed help. I assisted him, and he saw that I had a genuine aptitude for medicine. So he supported your ambition then." "He did, though my mother was less enthusiastic. She worried I would never find a husband if I pursued such an unconventional path." Katherine's smile turned wistful. "But my father convinced the Women's Medical College to accept me as a student, and I graduated 4 years later." "That's quite an achievement," Preston said, genuine admiration in his voice. "What about you?" Katherine asked. "How did you become the Shadow Rider?" Preston's expression closed slightly. "That's a name other people gave me. I never asked for it." "But you don't deny it either," he shrugged. "Reputations have their uses in my line of work, make some men think twice before drawing on me." "And before the war, who were you then?" Preston was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, as if the memories were physically distant as well as temporally. "I grew up in Kentucky. My father raised horses on a small farm near Lexington. He taught me to track, to read sign, to understand the land." A brief smile crossed his face. "And to shoot straight, though he hoped I'd never need that skill except for putting food on the table." "Did you plan to follow in his footsteps, raising horses?" "That was the idea, but then the war came." Preston's expression darkened. Kentucky was a border state. Families were torn apart over which side to support. Neighbors became enemies overnight. "And your family?" "My father didn't believe in slavery, but he didn't much care for federal interference either. He just wanted to be left alone to raise his horses and his family." Preston absently stroked the neck of his stallion, who had wandered over to investigate their rest stop. But neutrality wasn't an option for long. Raiders from both sides came through, taking what they wanted. After the third raid, there wasn't much left of our farm. "I'm sorry," Katherine said softly. "I joined the Union Army after that. My tracking skills made me valuable as a scout. I spent most of the war behind enemy lines, gathering information and guiding Union forces through unfamiliar territory." Preston's voice had taken on a detached quality, as if he were reciting someone else's history. "When the war ended, I couldn't go back to Kentucky, too many ghosts, so I kept moving west, using the only skills I had left." Katherine understood then the restlessness that drove him, the solitary nature of his existence. Like her, he had been shaped by loss and circumstance into something his younger self might not have recognized. "And your family?" she asked gently. "Gone. My mother died before the war. My father during it, not in battle, but from a fever that swept through the refugee camp where he'd ended up. My sister married a Union officer and moved to Ohio. We write occasionally, but our lives are very different now." The parallels between their stories struck Katherine, both orphaned by circumstances beyond their control, both forced to forge new paths in a changing world. Perhaps that was the unspoken connection she had felt from the beginning, a recognition of kindred spirits despite their different journeys. "We should move on," Preston said, breaking the moment of shared understanding. "Still a fair distance to Red Rock, and I'd like to arrive before dark." They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape growing more dramatic as they rode. Rocky cliffs rose on either side as they followed a narrow valley, the trail winding alongside a shallow creek. Despite the rugged terrain, Katherine found herself enjoying the ride. The bay mare was a steady mount, and there was a freedom in this journey that she had rarely experienced before. The vast sky above, the endless landscape around them, and the companionable presence of a man who seemed to understand her in ways few others had. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, they crested a rise and saw the settlement of red rock spread out below them, a collection of perhaps 20 buildings nestled in a natural bowl formed by red sandstone cliffs. A small river cut through the center of the town with a wooden bridge connecting the two sides. "There it is," Preston said, reining in his horse beside Katherine. "Red Rock, named for the obvious." "It's smaller than I expected," Katherine observed. "Most places out here are. But it's a mining supply stop, so there's usually a fair amount of activity despite the size." Preston's expression grew serious. "Remember, Harker may still be in the area. Stay close to me when we ride in." Katherine nodded, suddenly reminded of the potential danger that had brought them to this remote settlement. They descended the trail toward Red Rock, the clip-clop of their horses' hooves on the rocky path seeming unnaturally loud in the evening quiet. As they approached the town, Katherine noticed an unusual stillness. There were no people visible on the single dusty street, no smoke rising from chimneys despite the cooling evening air. The only movement came from a tattered banner hanging from the porch of what appeared to be a saloon, fluttering listlessly in the faint breeze. "Something's wrong," Preston said quietly, his hand moving to rest on his revolver. They rode cautiously into the town, the silence broken only by their horses' footfalls and the creaking of saddle leather. As they passed the first buildings, Katherine noticed that several had broken windows or splintered door frames, signs of violent entry, Harker's work. She asked in a hushed voice. Preston nodded grimly. "Looks like it, but where is everyone?" Their question was answered as they reached the center of town. A small crowd had gathered outside a two-story building with a sign identifying it as the Red Rock Hotel and General Store. As Preston and Katherine approached, a man stepped away from the group and moved to intercept them, a shotgun held loosely in his hands. "That's far enough, strangers," he called. "State your business." Preston raised his hands slightly to show he meant no harm. "Name's Preston Cole. I received a telegram about trouble here, a robbery, people injured." The man's posture relaxed slightly at Preston's words. "Cole, the bounty hunter." When Preston nodded, the man lowered his shotgun. "We've been hoping someone would come. Didn't expect it so soon, though." "I was nearby," Preston explained. "This is Dr. Katherine Winters. She's come to help with the injured." The man's eyes widened at the introduction. "A real doctor, thank the Lord." He turned toward the crowd. "Martha, tell Samuel we've got a doctor here." A woman detached herself from the group and hurried into the hotel. The man with the shotgun stepped forward, extending his hand to Preston. "I'm Walter Tanner, unofficial mayor of this sorry excuse for a town. We sure are glad to see you both." Preston dismounted and shook Tanner's hand. "What happened here, Mr. Tanner?" Harker and his gang rode in yesterday afternoon, 6 of them, all armed to the teeth. Tanner's face darkened with anger. "They hit the mining company office first, took the payroll that had just arrived for the men up at Silver Creek. Then they worked their way through town, taking whatever caught their fancy." "Was anyone hurt?" Katherine asked, dismounting from her mare. Tanner nodded solemnly. 3 dead, mister. Pearson from the mining office, young Billy Jenkins, who tried to stop them from harassing his sister, and one of Harker's own men who got caught in the crossfire when some of our folks tried to fight back. And the injured." Katherine pressed, her medical instincts taking precedence over her horror at the violence. 4 with gunshot wounds, including 10-year-old Abigail Foster. She was just crossing the street when the shooting started. Tanner's voice cracked slightly. "We've done what we could for them, but none of us has proper medical training." "Take me to them," Katherine said, retrieving her medical bag from her saddle. Tanner led them toward the hotel, explaining as they walked, "We put all the wounded in the hotel dining room. It was the cleanest space we could find, and it let us keep everyone together." The hotel's dining room had been transformed into a makeshift infirmary. Tables had been pushed together to form beds, and lamps had been lit despite the early hour, casting a warm glow over the room. 4 patients lay on the tables, attended by townspeople who looked up with expressions of desperate hope when Katherine entered. Katherine surveyed the scene quickly, her professional demeanor taking over. "I'll need clean water as much as you can provide, and clean cloths boiled if possible. Any alcohol you have whiskey will do, and fresh bandages if available." As the townspeople hurried to fulfill her requests, Katherine moved to the first patient, a middle-aged man with a wound to his shoulder. After a quick examination, she determined that the bullet had passed through without hitting any major blood vessels or bones. She cleaned and bandaged the wound, instructing one of the helpers on how to change the dressing later. The second patient was more serious, a young woman with a bullet lodged in her thigh. Katherine administered laudanum for the pain before carefully extracting the bullet and cleaning the wound. Throughout the procedure, she maintained a calm, reassuring manner that seemed to steady not just her patients, but everyone in the room. The third was an older man with a graze wound to his head that looked worse than it was. After cleaning and bandaging it, Katherine assured him that the dizziness he was experiencing would likely pass within a day or two. Finally, she turned her attention to young Abigail Foster, a small, pale child with blonde braids who lay frighteningly still on the smallest table. A woman who appeared to be her mother sat beside her, clutching her hand and whispering prayers. Katherine approached gently. "Mrs. Foster, I'm Dr. Winters. May I examine Abigail?" The woman looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Please help her. She's all I have left." With careful hands, Katherine removed the makeshift bandage covering the child's abdomen. The wound was serious. A bullet had entered just below her ribs on the right side. Katherine palpated the area gently, noting with relief that the bullet appeared to have missed the liver and other vital organs. "The bullet needs to be removed," she told Mrs. Foster, "and the wound thoroughly cleaned to prevent infection. I'll need to give her laudanum for the pain, but she's young and strong. With proper care, she has a good chance of recovery." As Katherine prepared for the delicate procedure, she was aware of Preston watching from near the door, his expression a mixture of admiration and something else she couldn't quite identify. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and she drew strength from his steady gaze before turning back to her young patient. The surgery was painstaking work, requiring all of Katherine's skill and concentration. When she finally extracted the bullet, a small, misshapen piece of lead. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Katherine cleaned the wound thoroughly, applied a poultice to draw out any remaining infection, and bandaged it carefully. "She'll need to be watched closely for fever," Katherine instructed Mrs. Foster, "and the bandage changed twice daily. I'll show you how." It was well past midnight by the time Katherine had tended to all 4 patients and provided instructions for their continued care. Exhaustion pressed down on her as she washed the blood from her hands in a basin of water that had been turned pink from repeated use. Preston appeared at her side, offering a cup of coffee. "You should rest," he said quietly. "You've been working for hours." Katherine accepted the coffee gratefully, the warm mug cradled between her tired hands. "Thank you. I just need to check on Abigail once more, and then perhaps I will." Walter Tanner approached them, his face lined with fatigue but his eyes bright with gratitude. "Doc, I don't know how to thank you. Those folks would likely be dead by morning if not for your help." "They still need careful watching," Katherine cautioned. "Especially the child. Infection is the greatest danger now." "We'll follow your instructions to the letter," Tanner assured her. "And we've prepared a room for you upstairs. It's not fancy, but it's clean and private." "What about Harker?" Preston asked, bringing the conversation back to the outlaw. Tanner's expression darkened. "Rode out yesterday evening, heading north toward the mountains. Said they'd be back if we sent for the law." "Which way exactly?" Preston pressed. "Followed the creek north toward Eagle Pass." Tanner glanced between Preston and Katherine. You aren't thinking of going after them alone, are you? There's 6 of them, 5 now, I suppose, since one died here. That's my job, Mr. Tanner, Preston said simply. But not tonight. Those wounded need watching, and Dr. Winters needs rest. Katherine wanted to protest that she was fine, but the bone-deep weariness she felt made a lie of that claim. Instead, she allowed Preston to escort her upstairs to the small room the townspeople had prepared. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window. You did amazing work tonight, Preston said as they reached the door. Those people owe you their lives. I was just doing what I was trained to do, Katherine demurred. As you do what you were trained for. Preston smiled slightly. Get some rest, Katherine. We'll talk in the morning. As the door closed behind him, Katherine realized that despite her exhaustion, she felt more fulfilled than she had in months. In Bitter Creek, she had always been the outsider, her skills tolerated rather than valued. Here in Red Rock, she had been able to use those same skills to truly help people who needed her. And Preston had seen her at her best, not running from a mob or sleeping on the ground, but practicing the medicine she had sacrificed so much to learn. The thought brought a warmth to her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee she had consumed. Katherine washed quickly at the basin before collapsing onto the bed, not even bothering to remove her blood-stained dress. Sleep claimed her almost instantly, deep and dreamless. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sounds of activity in the street below. For a moment she was disoriented, then the events of the previous day came rushing back. Katherine sat up quickly, concerned about her patients, particularly young Abigail. A quick glance in the small mirror above the washstand confirmed what she already knew. She looked a fright, her dress wrinkled and stained, her hair coming loose from its knot. She did what she could to make herself presentable, using the fresh water someone had thoughtfully placed on the washstand during the night. When Katherine descended to the dining room, she found it transformed back into something resembling its original purpose. The wounded had been moved to rooms upstairs, except for Abigail, who lay on a cot in the corner where her mother could easily attend her while helping in the kitchen. Preston sat at a table near the window, nursing a cup of coffee. He rose when he saw Katherine, pulling out a chair for her. "Morning," he said. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Katherine admitted, accepting the seat. "How are the patients?" "Stable, according to Mrs. Foster. The little girl had some fever in the night, but it broke toward dawn." Relief washed over Katherine. "That's good news." "I should check on them all after breakfast." A young woman approached their table with 2 plates of eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Compliments of Mr. Tanner and the whole town, Doc," she said with a shy smile. "We can't thank you enough for what you did last night." As they ate, Preston filled Katherine in on what he had learned about Harker and his gang while she had been sleeping. They've been working their way north for months, hitting small towns that don't have much in the way of law enforcement. They took over $5,000 from the mining company here payroll for nearly 100 men up at Silver Creek. "And you still plan to go after them?" Katherine asked, already knowing the answer. Preston nodded. "I'll leave as soon as we're done here. Their trail will already be a day old, but with the rain that fell last night, they might have slowed down. If I push hard, I could catch up to them by nightfall." Katherine felt a pang at the thought of his imminent departure. "Will you return to Red Rock afterward?" "That's the plan." "Bring Harker back to face justice for what he did here." Preston studied her face. "The eastbound stage comes through tomorrow morning. It can take you on to Cheyenne as we discussed." "I see." Katherine tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Unless." Preston seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "Unless," Katherine prompted when he didn't continue. "The people here need a doctor, Katherine, not just for a night but permanently." Tanner mentioned it. This morning said they've been trying to entice a physician to settle here for years, but none would consider such a small town so far from civilization. The implication of his words slowly registered. "Are you suggesting I stay in Red Rock?" "It's not Denver," Preston acknowledged. "It's smaller, rougher around the edges, but these people already respect you. They've seen what you can do, and with the silver mine up at the creek, the town's growing, they could support a doctor." Katherine considered the proposal. Red Rock was indeed far smaller than what she had envisioned for her future, but there was something appealing about the simplicity of the place and the genuine need of its people. In a larger city, she would be one of many physicians, constantly fighting for recognition and respect. Here she could make a real difference. I don't know, she said honestly. I hadn't considered staying somewhere so remote. Think about it while I'm gone, Preston suggested. No need to decide today. After breakfast, Katherine made her rounds, checking on each of her patients. All were stable, though Abigail would need continued careful monitoring. The townspeople had followed her instructions diligently, changing bandages and administering medications as directed. She was examining Abigail's wound when Preston appeared in the doorway, dressed for the trail with his revolver at his hip and a rifle in a scabbard attached to his saddle. "I'm heading out," he said simply. Katherine excused herself and followed him outside to where his horse waited, already saddled and supplied for the journey. "Be careful," she said, aware of how inadequate the words were given the danger he was riding into. Preston adjusted his hat against the morning sun. "Always am." "Will you?" Katherine hesitated, then pressed on. "Will you come back, regardless of what happens with Harker?" Something shifted in Preston's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight quirk at the corner of his mouth. "I'll come back, Katherine, that's a promise." Before she could respond, he mounted his horse in one fluid motion and tipped his hat to her. "Take care of these good people until I return." Katherine watched him ride out of town, following the creek northward toward the distant mountains where Harker and his gang had fled. Only when he had disappeared from sight did she return to her patients, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. The day passed quickly as Katherine attended to the wounded and spoke with other townspeople who sought her advice for various ailments. Word had spread quickly that a real doctor was in Red Rock, and many came to consult her about conditions they had been enduring for months or even years without proper medical attention. By evening, Katherine was exhausted but strangely fulfilled. Walter Tanner found her sitting on the hotel porch, watching the sunset paint the red cliffs that gave the town its name in deeper shades of crimson. "Busy day, Doc?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Very," Katherine smiled. "I think I've seen half the town for everything from arthritis to toothaches. Folks have been doing without proper medical care for too long," Tanner said. "Makes a difference, having someone who knows what they're doing." "Preston mentioned that you've been trying to attract a physician to Red Rock." Tanner nodded eagerly. "Going on 3 years now, sent letters to medical schools back east, offered free land for a doctor's office and living quarters. Even promised a percentage of the mining company's profits as a retainer for treating the miners. No takers so far." "It's a significant commitment to move so far from civilization," Katherine observed. "That it is," Tanner agreed. "Takes a special kind of person to see the potential in a place like Red Rock instead of just the challenges." He gave her a sidelong glance. "Someone like yourself, perhaps," Katherine laughed softly. "You're not subtle, Mr. Tanner. Never claimed to be Doc, but I am sincere." Tanner leaned forward, his expression earnest. "This town needs you, and from what Cole told me about your situation in Bitter Creek, you might need a fresh start somewhere folks will appreciate your skills." "Preston told you about Bitter Creek." "Just that you'd had some trouble there due to ignorant people not understanding modern medicine." Tanner shrugged. "We may be rough around the edges here in Red Rock, but we're not fools. We know the value of proper medical care." Katherine gazed out at the town, considering the offer. It was true that Red Rock presented an opportunity she might not find elsewhere, a chance to establish herself as the sole physician in a growing community. To practice medicine without the constant struggle for acceptance she had faced in Bitter Creek, and would likely face again in a larger city. "I'll think about it," she promised, "but I can't make any decisions until Preston returns." Tanner's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Of course, the man did ride to your rescue after all, creates a bond, that sort of thing." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "It's not none of my business," Tanner said, rising from his chair with a smile. But for what it's worth, Doc, I've never seen Cole look at anyone the way he looks at you, and I've known him for going on 5 years now." As Tanner walked away, Katherine was left to ponder his words and the fluttering sensation they had awakened in her chest. Was it possible that Preston felt something beyond the duty of a rescuer toward his charge? And if so, what did that mean for her own growing feelings toward the quiet, honorable man who had stood between her and harm not once but twice? The next day passed without word from Preston, and Katherine tried not to worry. She knew that tracking outlaws through the wilderness was unpredictable work, and Preston was more than capable of handling himself. Still, she found herself glancing frequently toward the northern trail, hoping to see a familiar figure approaching on a black stallion. The eastbound stage came and went, and Katherine remained in Red Rock. She told herself it was because Abigail still needed careful monitoring, but in her heart, she knew it was because she couldn't bear the thought of Preston returning to find her gone. On the third day after Preston's departure, Katherine was teaching Mrs. Foster how to prepare a poultice for Abigail's healing wound when a commotion outside drew their attention. Shouts and the thunder of hooves filled the air as Katherine hurried to the window. A group of riders was entering town from the north, 4 men on horseback, with 2 others slung across saddles. As they drew closer, Katherine recognized Preston at the lead, his hat pulled low and his expression grim. Behind him rode 3 rough-looking men with their hands bound, while 2 motionless forms, presumably dead, were tied over the remaining horses. Katherine rushed outside as the procession reached the center of town. Preston dismounted stiffly, and she noticed with alarm that his shirt was stained with blood on the right side. "You're hurt," she said, reaching him just as Walter Tanner and several other townsmen arrived. "It's nothing," Preston dismissed. "Just a graze. These men need securing first." He gestured to the bound riders. James Harker and what's left of his gang, the other 2 didn't surrender so peacefully. While Tanner and the other men took charge of the prisoners, leading them toward the small jailhouse at the end of the street, Katherine insisted on examining Preston's wound. "It's not a graze," she said accusingly when she had persuaded him to remove his shirt in the privacy of her makeshift examination room. "The bullet's still in there," Preston grimaced as she probed the wound in his side. "Figured as much. Happened during the initial confrontation. Didn't have time to deal with it properly. You rode for 2 days with a bullet in your side." Katherine's concern mingled with exasperation. "You could have bled to death or developed a serious infection." "Had a job to finish," Preston said simply. Katherine shook her head at his stubbornness as she prepared to extract the bullet. "This will hurt," she warned. "I can give you laudanum." "No," Preston interrupted. "Just do what you need to do. I'll manage." Katherine worked quickly and efficiently, cleaning the wound before carefully extracting the bullet lodged against one of Preston's ribs. Throughout the procedure, he remained stoically silent, though beads of sweat formed on his brow from the pain. "You're lucky," Katherine said as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. "The bullet missed anything vital and doesn't appear to have splintered the rib, but you've lost blood and you need rest." "Didn't feel particularly lucky when Harker shot me," Preston remarked dryly. Katherine smiled despite herself. "Well, you're alive, you captured the men you were after, and you made it back to Red Rock. I'd call that lucky." "I made a promise," Preston said, his eyes meeting hers. "Said I'd come back." The simple statement sent warmth flooding through Katherine. "Yes, you did." Later that evening, after ensuring that Preston was resting comfortably in a room at the hotel, Katherine joined Walter Tanner and some of the other townspeople who had gathered to discuss what to do with Harker and his men. "We'll need to get them to Cheyenne for trial," Tanner was saying. "That's the nearest federal marshal's office. I can escort them," Preston offered from the doorway, where he had appeared despite Katherine's orders to rest. "Once I've had a day or 2 to recover." Katherine rose to guide him to a chair, frowning at his disregard for his own health. "You shouldn't be up yet." "I've had worse," Preston said, but allowed her to help him sit. "The stage could take them," one of the miners suggested. Tanner shook his head. "Too risky. These men are desperate." They know they're facing hanging for the murders here. We need armed escorts who know what they're doing. I have contacts in Cheyenne, Preston said. Once we get there, I can arrange for the prisoners to be properly secured until trial. The discussion continued, with plans being made for the journey to Cheyenne. Katherine listened quietly, aware that this development would likely mean the end of her time in Red Rock. Preston would complete his mission by delivering Harker to justice, and she would finally continue on to Denver as originally planned. The thought brought less enthusiasm than it once had. As the meeting broke up, Preston remained seated, clearly fatigued from even this limited activity. Katherine stayed behind with him as the others filed out. You really should be resting, she admonished gently. Probably, Preston agreed, but I wanted to ask if you'd made any decisions about staying in Red Rock. Katherine sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. I've been considering it. The people here are kind and they certainly need a doctor. But, Preston prompted, sensing her hesitation, but it's not what I had planned. It's so small, so isolated, and I'm not sure I'm ready to settle in one place just yet. Katherine looked at him directly. What about you? After you deliver Harker to Cheyenne, where will you go? Preston considered the question. There's always another outlaw to track, another bounty to collect. Is that what you want, to keep moving from place to place, always alone? Something vulnerable flashed in Preston's eyes before he glanced away. Never really considered there might be other options. Katherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. What if there were other options, I mean? Preston's gaze returned to her face, searching. What kind of options? Red Rock needs a doctor, Katherine said. But Denver has hospitals, medical journals, colleagues I could consult with. It offers opportunities that a small town like this can't provide. Sounds like you've made your decision then, Preston said, his voice carefully neutral. Not exactly. Katherine reached out impulsively and took his hand. What I'm trying to say, rather poorly, is that perhaps there's a compromise. What if I divided my time, based myself in Denver but made regular circuits to communities that lack medical care, places like Red Rock? Preston looked down at their joined hands. A circuit doctor, it's not unheard of. I would need help, Katherine continued. The trails between settlements can be dangerous for a woman traveling alone. I would need someone who knows the territory, who can protect me from those who might mean harm. Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. Someone like me, you mean? If you were interested in such an arrangement, Katherine said, suddenly uncertain. It would mean giving up the constant pursuit of bounties, settling into a more predictable pattern. Working together, Preston clarified, you providing medical care, me providing protection. Yes, we make a good team, I think. Katherine hesitated, then added softly, and perhaps in time we might discover if we could be more than just colleagues. Preston was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Katherine began to fear she had misinterpreted his feelings, that she had overstepped some boundary. I should let you rest, she said, starting to withdraw her hand. Preston tightened his grip, keeping her hand in his. I've been alone a long time, Katherine. Since the war, I haven't let myself get close to anyone. Seemed safer that way. And now, Katherine asked, hardly daring to breathe. Now I'm wondering if safety is worth the cost. Preston's thumb traced a gentle pattern on the back of her hand. When I rode out of Bitter Creek with you, I told myself I was just doing what any decent man would do. When I asked you to come to Red Rock, I convinced myself it was because these people needed a doctor. And it wasn't, Preston smiled slightly. Oh, they needed a doctor all right, but I could have brought any physician here. I wanted it to be you. Katherine felt her heart quicken. Why? Because in the short time I've known you, you've shown more courage, compassion, and determination than most people I've met in my entire life. Preston's voice was low, intimate. Because when I'm with you, I can imagine a future that isn't just chasing the next bounty or sleeping under the stars alone. Preston, Katherine began, but words failed her. I can't promise I'll be any good at settling down, he warned. Might take me some time to adjust to a life that doesn't involve tracking outlaws across 3 territories. I'm not asking you to give up who you are, Katherine assured him, just to consider sharing that life with someone else. Preston's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "I'd like that, Katherine, very much." The distance between them seemed to close of its own accord as Preston leaned forward, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss that spoke of promise and possibility. Katherine's eyes fluttered closed as she returned the kiss, her heart soaring with a joy she had never expected to find in this remote corner of Wyoming territory. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "So, Denver with regular visits to places like Red Rock." Katherine smiled. "For now, who knows where we might end up eventually? As long as we're together," Preston said, "I expect we'll find our way." 3 months later, Katherine stood at the window of her small medical office in Denver, watching as Preston secured their supplies to the pack horse in the alley below. It was time for their monthly circuit, a journey that would take them through 4 settlements over the course of 2 weeks, with Red Rock as their final destination before returning to Denver. In the short time since they had arrived in the city, Katherine had established a modest but growing practice, focusing primarily on women and children, but accepting any patient who sought her care. Her reputation for skill and compassion had quickly spread, and she now had more work than she could reasonably handle alone. Preston had adjusted to city life better than either of them had expected. While Katherine saw patients in Denver, he worked with the territorial marshal's office, using his tracking skills to help bring criminals to justice. The arrangement allowed him to maintain the freedom he cherished while giving him a home base to return to a home he shared with Katherine. Their relationship had deepened gradually, both of them cautious by nature and experience. But living and working together, sharing the dangers of the trail and the quiet moments in between, had forged a bond between them that grew stronger with each passing day. As Katherine watched Preston work, she reflected on the strange series of events that had brought them together: her flight from Bitter Creek, his timely intervention, their journey to Red Rock. What had begun as a desperate escape had transformed into a partnership neither of them had anticipated but both now treasured. Preston looked up, catching sight of her at the window. He tipped his hat with a smile that still made her heart skip a beat. Katherine waved in acknowledgement before turning away to gather her medical bag and prepare for their departure. Life on the frontier was unpredictable, often dangerous, and rarely easy. But Katherine had found something she hadn't even known. She was seeking not just a place to practice medicine without prejudice, but a partner who valued her for exactly who she was. A man who had stood between her and harm and continued to do so every day in ways both large and small. As she descended the stairs to meet Preston in the alley, Katherine thought of all the trails that lay ahead of them, some familiar, others yet to be discovered. Whatever challenges those paths might hold, they would face them together, the doctor and her shadow rider, finding their way in a world that was vast and wild but no longer quite so lonely. Preston helped Katherine mount her bay mare, his hands lingering briefly at her waist before he swung up onto his own stallion. Side by side, they rode out of Denver toward the open prairie beyond, the future stretching before them like an uncharted territory waiting to be explored. And somewhere between the rugged beauty of the Wyoming wilderness and the growing promise of Denver, they had found what many spend a lifetime seeking: a place to belong, not defined by walls or borders but by the presence of each other. It was more than enough. It was everything.